The US auto industry has hit some serious bumps in the road lately, and it's not just about cars, it's about complicated global connections getting tangled up. Here's the big picture. For years, the US has relied on a massive trade network, especially with neighbors like Canada and Mexico, who've been steady suppliers of car parts and vehicles. Things ran smoothly until new trade rules flipped the script. Enter Donald Trump's America First strategy. His administration slapped heavy tariffs, basically extra taxes, on materials like steel and aluminum, key ingredients in making cars. Suddenly, suppliers and automakers found themselves paying 25% more for these imports. This wasn't just a headache for big car companies. Everyday buyers started feeling the pinch too, as car prices crept higher. Trump argued these tariffs would protect American jobs and boost local industries. But not everyone bought into that idea. Many economists and central banks raised red flags, warning that higher costs could slow down sales, strain the auto market, and even put jobs at risk. Why does this matter so much? Because modern car making isn't as simple as building everything under one roof. It's like a giant puzzle, with thousands of pieces coming from different places. Steel from Canada, gearboxes from Mexico, and even parts from Europe and Asia. Final assembly usually happens in US states like Michigan, Ohio, and Kentucky, where factories count on this flow of parts to keep things efficient and affordable. But when you throw in hefty tariffs, up to 25% on some imports, it disrupts the whole system. Cars get more expensive to build, and guess who ends up paying the difference? Yep, the buyers. Experts say that with these extra fees, the price of a new car in the US could jump anywhere from $1,000 to several $1,000s. That's a pretty steep price hike for families already stretching their budgets. Big cars like SUVs, pickup trucks, and commercial vehicles could take the hardest hit from rising costs. And here's why. These vehicles need a lot of metal, and with new tariffs in play, the price of that metal is skyrocketing. But it's not just the finished car getting taxed. The ripple effect runs deep, right down to raw materials and every tiny part that goes into making a car. Think of it like this: an engine block from Mexico, a sturdy chassis from Canada, or an electronic chip from Korea or China. Each of these gets slapped with extra fees as they cross US borders. The Trump administration saw this as a way to push companies to make more stuff right here in the US. But experts waved red flags, warning that when the final price of a car jumps, fewer people will want to buy. That means fewer cars rolling off the assembly lines, and in some cases, jobs might be on the chopping block. Canada, a major supplier of car parts and raw materials for American automakers, didn't take this lightly. A country usually seen as a friendly neighbor suddenly found itself in a tense standoff with the Trump administration. Canadian officials made it crystal clear: if the US hits us with heavy tariffs, we'll hit back. That kind of back and forth could spell trouble, especially for US car makers who rely on selling vehicles and parts outside the country. Meanwhile, American families were already feeling the squeeze from rising prices at home. The Federal Reserve, the folks who keep an eye on the economy, warned that these tariffs could push inflation even higher. If car prices surge, middle and lower income buyers might simply hold off, waiting for things to cool down. And when fewer people buy cars, it's not just automakers who feel it. Dealers end up stuck with unsold cars, factories slow down production, and workers could see their hours cut, or worse, lose their jobs. Trump, however, stuck to his message: bring manufacturing back home and protect American workers. It's a message that sounds good on paper, but when you dig deeper, you have to wonder, who really comes out on top? Experts say building cars isn't as simple as just deciding, let's make everything right here in the US. The auto industry is like a giant puzzle, with pieces coming from all over the world. Even basic materials like steel and aluminum aren't produced in large enough quantities in the US to meet demand. So companies have to look abroad. And here's the kicker: making everything from scratch in the US would be crazy expensive. Labor costs are higher, environmental rules are stricter, and setting up new factories would cost billions. Over the years, the auto industry has built a smooth-running global supply chain tightly linked with countries like Canada, Mexico, and Japan. Breaking those ties overnight, that would send costs through the roof. Trade deals like NAFTA, And its newer version, USMCA, helped shape these cross-border partnerships. But Trump was never a fan of NAFTA, calling it a bad deal for the US, which is why he pushed for the USMCA instead. Even with the updated agreement, Trump kept circling back to one big concern: America's trade deficit. That's when the talk of more tariffs fired up again. Canada and Mexico weren't too happy. Their warning? If you slap tariffs on us, you're not just hurting us, you're hitting your own car makers too. Take Mexico, for instance. Millions of cars roll out of its factories each year headed straight for American driveways. Many of these cars are made by US companies or joint ventures. Mess with that system, and the whole production chain feels the hit, from factory floors to showroom lots. So who really pays the price? The average American, the workers, the dealerships, even the big car brands. The Cato Institute broke it down with some eye-opening charts. Their research showed how deeply cars are stitched together from parts made across borders. Engines from Mexico, seats from Canada, electronics from Asia. Tariffs on these parts don't just make a small dent. They jack up costs by 10%, 15%, even 25%. And that extra cost? It's tacked right onto the final sticker price of the car. Manufacturers were already burning through billions covering the cost of metal tariffs between 2020 and 2023. Pile on new taxes for car parts, and they're left wondering, how are we supposed to keep up? And it gets trickier. American buyers love their big, tough vehicles, SUVs, trucks, heavy-duty rides. But these are also the cars that use the most metal. That means they'll see the steepest price hikes. Now imagine this. A family walks into a dealership, spots the truck they want, but sees the prices jump by $2,000 or $3,000. They might think twice. Maybe they wait it out. Maybe they buy used. Maybe they skip the upgrade altogether. And when people stop buying, sales slow down, dealerships get stuck with unsold cars, and factories scale back. Meanwhile, inflation keeps creeping up, and the Federal Reserve has been waving the warning flag, urging the government to pay attention. Tariffs might sound like a quick fix to boost the US economy, but experts warn they could actually make things worse, especially when it comes to inflation and interest rates. The idea behind tariffs is simple: make imported goods more expensive so people buy more American-made products. But here's the catch: it's not that simple in the real world. Some folks in the White House figured if we slap heavy taxes on imported cars and parts, people will turn to US-made vehicles. But there's a problem with that logic. Almost no car is 100% made in the US. Even big American names like Ford, General Motors, and Tesla rely on parts from outside the country, things like batteries, steel, and electronics. So when cross-border shipping gets pricey or complicated because of tariffs, American car makers feel the squeeze. Sure, in the long run, they might think about shifting more production back home, but that's not something that happens overnight. Transforming factories, hiring more workers, and adjusting supply chains takes years, not months. In the meantime, there's chaos. Prices jump, markets wobble, and layoffs could follow. This isn't just speculation. It played out in real time in 2025 when whispers about Trump planning even more auto tariffs hit the news. Outlets like CNN and BBC quickly warned, get ready for sticker shock at car dealerships. The Federal Reserve chimed in too, pointing out that rising car prices would fuel inflation, something they've been battling to control. Yahoo Finance didn't sugarcoat it either, flat out saying, if you think tariffs will boost the US economy, think again. One banking analyst even compared it to the 2002 steel tariffs under President George W. Bush. Back then, the plan backfired, hurting US industries that relied on steel and leading to thousands of job losses. Now, people are wondering, are we about to make the same mistake again? And remember, American automakers aren't just competing with each other. They're up against global giants from Europe, Japan, Korea, and China. If tariffs hit all foreign-made cars and parts, the US auto market could spiral into chaos. Prices would swing wildly. Supply chains would be thrown into disarray, and some companies might even rethink their entire production models. Take manufacturers who build cars in Mexico, for instance. If tariffs make that too costly, they might consider pulling out and relocating production, but that's a massive, time-consuming shift. Making everything in the US might sound like a patriotic solution, but in reality, it's far from simple. Labor costs alone make it tricky, and waving a "let's produce it all here" magic wand doesn't fix the deeper issues. Both carmakers and buyers are feeling the pressure as confusion grows. Let's look at it from a buyer's perspective. Imagine you're eyeing a basic sedan that used to cost around $20,000 to $25,000. Thanks to tariffs, that same car could now set you back $27,000 or $28,000. SUVs, they could jump from $35,000 to over $40,000. And those ever-popular pickup trucks? Tack on another $2,000 to $3,000. For middle-class families, that's a game changer. A $5,000 or $6,000 jump in car prices could make people rethink their plans. Instead of buying new, they might hold off or settle for used cars. Fewer buyers mean dealerships sit on unsold cars, factories scale back production, and workers could face layoffs. It's the kind of economic slowdown that has central banks raising red flags. Instead of boosting growth, these tariffs could push the economy closer to a recession. And here's where it gets even more tangled. Even though Canada is usually considered a friendly trade partner, tensions over tariffs have been high. Now add Mexico into the mix. Trump's been critical of Mexico for years, over immigration, border walls, and the trade deficit. But here's the thing, Mexico is a powerhouse when it comes to car production for the US. Big names like Nissan, Ford, GM, and Toyota all have factories in Mexico churning out parts and even fully assembled vehicles. This system has been in place since the 1990s, thanks to free trade agreements. Slapping a 25% tariff on cars coming from Mexico, that would completely disrupt this setup. For these companies, moving production back to the US isn't just a matter of packing up and heading north. It would take years, 5 or 6 maybe, and billions of dollars to rebuild the factories and supply chains. So who gets hurt in the meantime? Consumers who pay more, car dealers stuck with overpriced stock, and factory workers facing job cuts. Mexican officials, much like their Canadian counterparts, are pushing back. They're warning that these tariffs won't just hurt Mexico, they'll hit American businesses and consumers too. But Trump stays firm on his America First agenda, determined to reshape trade on his terms, no matter who feels the squeeze. Big names like GM and Ford aren't shy about it. They've made it clear that these tariffs could seriously hurt their business. Here's why. Automakers are pouring billions into developing electric vehicles, EVs, and building supply chains for batteries. But if tariffs jack up costs, that money could dry up fast. Suddenly, it's harder to fund new tech, slow down gas guzzlers, and push EVs onto American roads. And EVs aren't made from simple stuff. Batteries, rare metals, and massive components often come from overseas. Slap tariffs on those imports, and the US shift toward greener cars could hit a major speed bump. Of course, Trump's camp argues, look, we import too much and don't produce enough here. This has to change. But when you dig into the numbers, it's not that black and white. The US is already a manufacturing powerhouse, ranking second or third globally in car production. Sure, imports exist, but so do exports. It's been a well-oiled cross-border machine for decades. The problem, disrupting that network isn't like flipping a switch. Breaking established supply chains could spark chaos. Experts say it could take 5 to 10 years and billions of dollars to adjust. In the meantime, there could be mass layoffs, soaring car prices, and even retaliatory tariffs from trade partners, shaking the entire economy. Trump might shrug and say, so what if cars cost $2,000 or $3,000 more? Americans can handle it. But auto industry insiders warn that even a few extra $1,000 can scare off middle-class buyers. Fewer sales mean dealerships sit on unsold cars. Automakers lose money, and car loans get pricier. And it doesn't stop there. Higher car prices could fuel inflation, forcing the Federal Reserve to raise interest rates, putting even more pressure on consumers and businesses. One policy change, and suddenly multiple parts of the US economy feel the heat. This isn't just a let's boost local production plan. It's a domino effect. Even if you just look at data from the last 5 years, it's clear. US car makers heavily rely on trade with Canada and Mexico. Building a single car might involve 7 or 8 border crossings for different parts. Every time a part crosses with a 25% tariff, costs skyrocket. Canada's been vocal about this too. They're saying, hey, we supply your refineries with heavy crude oil and help with your steel. These tariffs hurt you just as much as us. Mexico's warning is blunt. If you push us away, who's going to make the parts for your cars? And then there's the wild card, Congress. They might just step in and block it altogether. Right now, it's all up in the air. One thing's certain though, the US auto industry isn't just an American powerhouse. It's deeply tied to Canada and Mexico. Break those links, and you're not just cutting ties, you're piling on extra costs. And here's the kicker. Many American car makers aren't thrilled about this plan either. GM, Ford, even Tesla, they all rely on imported parts. Take Tesla, for example, its shiny EVs. They need rare minerals and battery materials that don't all come from US soil. Tariffs could throw a major wrench into their supply chains. If even a tiny part gets stuck behind a tariff wall, entire production lines could grind to a halt. So the big question, will these tariffs actually happen the way Trump envisions? Lobbyists from major auto companies are already knocking on Congress's door, arguing that this plan could backfire. Economists and central bank officials are waving red flags, warning of price hikes and economic turbulence. But if the tariffs kick in before any changes are made, brace yourself. Cars could get thousands of dollars more expensive overnight, and that could cause a political firestorm. Trump might double down, turning this into a 2025 election talking point. I'm protecting American jobs no matter what. Some voters might cheer, others, not so much, especially when they see the price tag on their next car. All of this leaves the US economy in a state of total uncertainty. And when experts are asked if these tariffs will actually boost the economy, most just shake their heads. History's pretty clear. Short-term gains for a few, long-term pain for everyone else. When it comes to the auto industry, a massive global machine, every small tweak can cause major ripples. And history? Well, it's not exactly on tariff's side. Think back to the days of Nixon and Reagan. Both tried to protect American car makers by slapping on trade restrictions. But instead of reviving factories, all it really did was push car prices up. Shoppers bailed, and foreign brands from Japan, Korea, and Europe, they kept growing anyway. So the whole tariffs will fix everything idea, it hasn't really panned out before. Canada and Mexico aren't sitting quietly either. They've made it clear, if the US hits us with tariffs, we'll strike back. For companies that rely on exporting cars to the US, that's a giant headache. They're now stuck wondering, should we keep shipping here, or is it time to pivot? But here's the real question. Will these new tariffs actually help American car makers, or are we all chasing a fantasy? Will factories really come back to the US, or is that just wishful thinking? Economists are already weighing in, and many of them are waving red flags. They say this move could light a fire under inflation, throw the auto industry into chaos, jack up prices, and ultimately hurt the US economy. But hey, only time will tell who's got it right. What do you think? Is Trump onto something? Does the US really need these tariffs? Or are the experts right? Will this protectionist push backfire? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that like button, subscribe, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. Stick around as we keep an eye on rising car prices, the auto industry's next moves, and how this whole standoff with Canada and Mexico might shake out. Because one thing's for sure, this tariff debate isn't just about car makers. It could end up hitting millions of American drivers right where it hurts most, their wallets. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe.